Is there a number one characteristic of a really successful company? It's leadership. It was leadership. Good companies are run by good leaders. The success that we have as entrepreneurs comes from the contribution of the people on our team,
100%.
not from us. I've helped hundreds, if not
That's
more,
awesome.
just it's a small industry, and so you touch a lot of people at a lot of levels.
Yep.
And some of it's personal coaching, some of it was the video training, some of it was workshops. There's been a lot of impact and touch.
And I think you have two choices, right? You can live the life that you design, or you can live whatever happens by default. If you just go through the motions and you're reactive, well, guess what? Default's going to happen. I think the fundamental mindset shift that has to happen in restoration is just the way you think about capital and money to shift in an abundance mindset. You don't move money. You don't push money. You attract it. Welcome, everybody, to the Albi After Hours Podcast, where we talk about propelling the restoration industry forward. I'm Alex Studa, your host, and today I'm super excited because at the end of this podcast, we're going to be talking about 5 timeless traits that lead to restoration success. And we're going to be talking about this with no one other than Mr. Phil Rosebrook, who is with Business Mentors. He's got 4 decades of experience within the restoration space, has rubbed shoulders with some of the largest restoration moguls, and has been in the situation room when some interesting transactions have happened. And Phil, I mean, we were talking over lunch, and your story is just super unique, and there's a lot of parallels. So I can't wait to dive in, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Of course, when you say 4 decades, it makes me feel old. So
And I also rounded up, you
did, yes.
So.
But yeah, people always start doing the math here. I started out in the 80s. I'm a child of the 80s in restoration. So,
but you started out really young,
17.
just for the record. There
17.
we go.
My adult working life has been in restoration.
Wow, the entire career.
The entire career. Yeah, I have given lots more job interviews than I've ever actually been a participant in. So.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Well, let's dive in. I'd like to start with just, we talked about it over lunch, but your origin story. You mentioned you were born in Chicago, and there's a lot of father-son relationships that ended up going into restoration. So yeah, tell us your life story.
Yes.
Tell us where you were born, where it all started, and how you ended up in Oregon, and then how you ended up in restoration and now in restoration coaching.
Well, without going down too many rabbit holes, but it's a good story, it really is, because it was foundational for who I became as an individual, as a business person, as a father. I was born in Chicago, left here when I was 3 years old. So I don't have memories of Chicago, but if you're from Oregon, and you'll find these people that would say they're native Oregonians, and there's very few of them. I'm not a native Oregonian.
I see.
Although I lived there
most of your life.
My memory, my entire memory of a childhood. But so born in Chicago, my father was in a position he was able to sell. He had 5 businesses, very entrepreneurial in the 50s, late 50s and 60s, and sold all of his businesses and packed up a moving truck and moved to McKenzie Bridge, Oregon.
Wow.
A little wide spot in the road.
Why?
My mom was a flight attendant. I think my dad, so this will be recording, he might have been a bit of a player, but I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
Stories about in the apartment complex where all the flight attendants were. And
interesting.
Yeah,
well, those are the good old days
they
for
were
that,
the good
right?
old days. You could do that. And his best man in his wedding was the most eligible bachelor in Chicago at the time.
Oh, wow.
So a little Chicago history there. The guy's name is Larry Marsh. You can go look him up somewhere.
Oh, wow.
So anyhow, he decided that he was working way too much and was killing himself working.
Oh.
And so there was as he tells it, there's this big billboard between his office and his house, and it had a picture of a waterfall from McKenzie Bridge, Oregon.
Wow.
In Chicago, he has a summer home in McKenzie Bridge, Oregon, and then he decided that he liked who he was in Oregon better than who he was here, and that he was going to die at a very young age from stress and working too much. Wow. And so he became a person worth being. This is what he, in his words, become a person worth being rather than having things worth having. That pursuit of more, which there's a restoration story in that. Sam Dath from Benefact. I don't know if you ever met Sam. Sam's a real quality person. We used to do conferences here in Chicago, and Sam did a presentation once on how much is enough. And he had a business coach that helped him define that. And if you don't define how much enough is,
you're always chasing it. You're always
the answer's
unhappy.
more. And you never get there. He had 7 people on his personal board, or 5, and some number around that. And the others didn't define how much enough was. And for them, it was more, and they lost everything to get more. So they got more money, but they were divorced. They didn't have quality of life. And so my father kind of understood that and made this decision. I had 20 people in my graduating class.
Wow.
I couldn't see my neighbors, and I learned to work at a young age.
Okay.
I split wood, and we had cattle, and pulled lots of weeds.
But that's what was life for him, right?
And that's what was life for my indentured childhood. But it was good because there was so much learned in that. And I grew up I raised a family in the city, and it's tough to pass on that level. Okay, go fold clothes now.
Yep.
It's just different than I told my dad I was bored once, and he says, "All right, go split wood."
Yep.
About an hour later, I came in and said, "I'm not bored anymore." He says, "No, go split some more wood." So what time I was ever bored in my childhood.
So how did you end up from a farm in the middle of Oregon, splitting wood, to restoration?
Yeah. So my father didn't have enough money, I think, to stay retired, nor did he have the desire to stay retired. His ranch hands were leaving the house.
I see.
And, at the time, I think he needed to both partly just the value of a person to go back to work, and partly I think he needed to go back to work because he didn't work another 5 years here in Chicago. He sold and got out. And so he had a friend that had a restoration company. So in February of 1988, my senior year in high school, he bought a restoration company.
Wow.
It was a medium-sized company in Eugene, Oregon, single location. And my first restoration work was spring break of my senior year of high school. Some kids are going to Mexico. Some kids are, I don't know, having trips or just fun or doing whatever. And I was cleaning walls.
Your dad purchases the business. You guys start getting into business in restoration. This is the late 80s, early 90s when you're growing this company. How was it? Like when we were talking, it seemed like restoration was very similar back then as it was today, but there was also, there were these unique differences also. So tell us more about that. What was it like?
I mean, restoration's always been about cleaning and drying and repairing things, probably in some different orders back then. One of the things that we discussed was that one of the unique qualifiers could be the quality of work you did, or the fact that we were able to save something and other people weren't. And I think in today's world, it's kind of just it's table stakes. And so you've got to be good at the work you do. How you're going to differentiate yourself is now based on, maybe it's the personal service, it's the metrics, how quickly we can do something and prove that we did it, how it's showing the time of upload and response and time of closing files and all that stuff. So you have to be good at the work now. And back then it could be a differentiator. We were unique because we really jumped on drying early on. We were close up in the Northwest, close to the Dry Ease headquarters, and we were kind of tuned in technically and we knew about software. We knew about technically drying things out, great customer service. Those were differentiators.
Hang on, software in the 90s. Tell me more.
Yes, okay.
Like DOS looking thing and like giant machine like computers. Like probably wasn't even born when you were using restoration software. So tell me more about it.
So we decided my father decided that we needed to be doing computer estimating because that was the future. Back when I first started, you had to know how something went together. And I wasn't a construction guy, but I asked a lot of questions. And so you go write a sheet and you look and I had the guy who trained me in estimating said, I go to Home Depot every Saturday and I walk the aisles and I figure out how much things cost. I know the cost of my materials. I know how long something takes. And then when you put a price in, you need to know if it makes sense. We'd go out and you write up a sheet on these really long tablet papers with, all your columns. And then
you write there like replace drywall, labor, material.
R&R drywall, yeah. And then you put a price, put a lineal price that you could then look at the final price and say, does this make sense?
Mm-hmm.
As an estimate, now you don't have to think, does that
Yep.
price make sense? It's just, what do the columns say?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was important to know how something went together, how much time it would take.
Mm-hmm.
So then we turn it in, and the bookkeeper or estimate or office manager would type everything up.
Mm-hmm.
And in the morning, you'd have your sheet done that you could then go walk over to the adjuster's office. So the computerized estimating comes around. There was a couple of products out there, and we played around with a few of them. Best was one of them. There was something called Project
Mm-hmm.
and Xactimate. We looked at all of them and then landed on Xactimate, and it was the DOS version of it
Mm-hmm.
because we could see that was the future
Yep.
that was the future of estimating. And if we knew that better than the adjusters did or that our competitors, we could be the experts and we could train people in it.
Mm-hmm.
And then price was kind of removed from a lot of the equation of the estimating process. It was scope. Our price is your price.
Yeah. Was Xactware still like a super small company at the time?
It was
still like owned by Mr. Loveland, James Loveland
Yes.
at the time, and it was contractor focused. Like, that's a beautiful story.
It was. So they had there was two elements to that. So yes, it was a DOS version, which I really liked the DOS.
So it was like a green and black screen kind of.
Yeah, and if you knew your three
Tab,
codes
tab, enter, enter.
on the 30 items that you typically put in an estimate anyhow, and you knew your 6 letters, you could scoot through an estimate pretty quick, and then copy and paste was easy in DOS. So nonetheless, so they had a brilliant product that I was sorry to see go away. They had Xactimate. And people that use that know how good it was to have an integrated solution. So your estimating was attached to your accounting. So job costing, budgeting, all that stuff was great. And so...
Yeah, and this is early 90s. So early 90s...
92, 91, 92.
Wow.
90, 91.
So restoration technology was a differentiator back in the 90s.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
30 some years ago. All right.
Yeah, but there wasn't a lot of options.
And you mentioned, you were using Access databases for accounting because there weren't really.
Well, it wasn't accounting, so we used Xactimate. That was for our job management. That was for so all the jobs like you would do now with Albi. We'll enter the customer name and address and everything into it, and then we could start running searchable databases.
Yep.
So we could track out by insurance company or just. And
then you would update the columns within the spreadsheets of the status or.
But we still use the dry erase boards and still use, which people are still using today.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
Yeah.
So what happened to the company? I remember you said you had 4 locations. It grew quite successfully.
Yeah.
You and your father had, expanded throughout the Oregon area.
We
what happened with the
actually
company?
we were in small markets. So the strategy was to always be the significant player in a small market where the insurance companies didn't have dependable solutions. And so that was a really good strategy. And we would go open up an office with about 2 people. So you'd hire, it was some of my college friends or people that knew construction that could go extract water one day and then the next day go to the Rotary meeting or talk to an adjuster or whatever it was. And so it was easy to open up in those small offices and be relevant. And we were integrated in the community. We joined the chamber. We would be involved in community events because we were outsiders. We were from Eugene, the big town of Eugene, which is not a very big town. And so we had 4 offices and had a really quality, significant, kind of a leading edge company in a lot of ways.
And this was before the TPAs. So like this is relationships with adjusters, agents, community people. That's where your work was coming from?
Yeah, it was coming from relationships. It was coming from adjusters. It was agents. It was
no Google at the time, I assume. No PPC or anything like that.
No, there was no internet at the time. There was no cellular phone technology. I used to have pagers and then I'd have to stop and make a phone call from that payphone.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it's old school.
Super interesting. So Restoration Millionaire would not have worked back then.
But the process do. I mean, all this stuff. Your book was about systems. It was really about systems, and systems existed then too. And if you could systemize what you were doing, you'd create consistent products, especially when you spanned out over a regional area with offices that weren't, with cities that weren't really sophisticated. With a workforce, it's a blue collar workforce. Always been a blue collar workforce. The systems are good. Your book lays out a strategy and process. The things that weren't relevant about your book was
the online marketing part,
online marketing,
the tech part,
any of the technology stuff. But I mean, a differentiator for me in the days, the fax machine. We get this in the morning. You'd come in and you'd have a $100,000 scope rolled up on the floor from the fax machine that the adjuster sent over the night before. And then somebody would go and scissors and cut them into pages. And I mean, real old school stuff. You don't learn a lot from that.
I remember that. It was like the paper was collated, and then you had this like little circles on the side that you ripped off the side.
That wasn't even the fax. That was the dot matrix printers.
Oh, okay. Got it. Yeah. I mean, these are just antique stuff that I remember seeing, my parents or whatever having.
Yeah, the fax machine, that was on a thermal paper or something like that. And so it was like really thin paper.
Got it.
But what was relevant is kind of this, that we were sending emails, that we fax emails. They were faxed. Everybody faxed everything. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, this is really silly. I want to go hand deliver every single estimate. I want to go show up at the adjuster's office. This is back before they had
desk adjusters in Atlanta or whatever.
Even when they had desk adjusters, we still did the same thing. I still would deliver them because I wanted to hand the estimate to somebody. And it's really, you would learn a lot sitting across the desk from an agent or from an adjuster and looking at their eyes when they handed you, because everybody looked, this taught me how to write a good estimate, a good sheet, because they'll look at the sheet and they'll glance at that, and then they'll flip, they'll look at the back page, and their eyes either get really big or they're like, okay. So it just allowed me to read people. And so I would want to hand it off because I like to say, okay, what did you think? Mm-hmm. And it got me in the habit of, then I started realizing as you got through this approval lesson, in the discipline of writing an estimate, is I never wrote the estimate for the person that I'm handing it to. I wrote it for their boss. Because when I learned that those were audited and somebody else was looking at that, and if they had to answer the question for their boss, I made them do extra work.
Makes sense.
So my opening statement, my F9 notes, was all clarified description of what we're going to do. But I looked at it like an adjuster did now, or like the people that I was sitting across the table from, because they'll go down the right-hand column and a big number, they'll go search back over to the left and say, what is that? And so if I saw a big number, I wanted to explain what that was, why it was necessary, or I wanted to break it out and make it a smaller number. To make smaller unit costs, because I realized that in writing the estimate, the bottom line, everything above that bottom line is a justification for the bottom line. And that doesn't change today. So if we got a bottom line and it makes sense, great. But if it doesn't, then I better justify it through what I did. And it's not gonna be through a conversation. I'm gonna make a phone call because now my adjuster's got to go write up all these notes. It's still the same today. One of the important elements in success, and this is success of individuals, of companies, of whatever, is about character. And if, as the owner of the company, I'm trying to hide something, I want to get a little more by doing something that's less than clear, what does that say to the rest of my organization, to the people working for me? If I'm going to be transparent with my clients, I'm going to be transparent with my staff, I'm going to be transparent with my family. It's going to be an open book, because when it's an open book, then I expect that on the other side.
That's awesome.
And it's necessary as well. I mean, the success that we have as entrepreneurs comes from the contribution of the people on our team,
100%.
Not from us. And so what do we do to model that behavior to them? It's clear. My basketball coach in high school, I didn't get much from him. He wasn't a great coach. I loved it. It was a great sport. But he had said, and it was just obvious, you play like you practice, so practice like a pro.
That's deep.
So what you're going to do around the office, a simple example, what do your trucks look like? Or does your warehouse look like?
Yep.
That's what your job site's going to look like. There's no difference.
100%.
So if I'm going to model behavior from my activities internally, then that's what I'm going to give externally. And so if I'm going to be less than clear on my data, there's a good chance somebody's stealing money from me somewhere.
100%. That's deep. Or the way you are as a customer when you're, a customer of other people is the way your customers are going to show up with you. Yeah. So next time you go haggle the new truck and beat up that one salesperson, well, chances are you're going to probably get beat up by one of your customers in the future. But we're diving into these pieces of timeless advice that I want to save for the end for all of our viewers here, and we'll unpack all of them. But let's continue with the story. So we're sitting here. You had grown the company. You have multiple locations. What happens next? How do you end up from there and kind of where we're at today?
Into consulting. I'd love to say it was through massive amounts of success. However, in life, the lessons you learn are quite frequently taken from your challenges and your failures.
100%.
Sometimes they're your causing, and sometimes you're you're, I don't say a victim, but it's just happening outside. And I think they all contribute everywhere. So we just took a year where everything bad that could happen in a company does, from car accidents to great clients retiring to a slow year to cash problems to everything else. And at the end of that, somebody showing up on our door and saying, would you be interested in selling your company? So my father came, looked at my brother and I and said, what do you guys think? This is going to be your company. And he'd fallen into this trap that he was living here in Chicago when he was leaving the house at 5 a.m. and getting back at 6 at night. And it's like, man, I don't want that life. And so, yeah, sell it. Get some, we can do something with some capital here. This is kind of exciting. So maybe you should take that opportunity and go do something different. The two gentlemen that bought our company, and these names, I don't know if everybody listening will get it right away, but it was two gentlemen named Mark Davis and Jeff Johnson. And Mark Davis and Jeff Johnson had just gotten into the industry about 3 years earlier. Wow. It might even been 2.
And they bought early days.
Yeah, they bought a $3.5 million company in Denver, Colorado. And they told the story. This was, we still had our company. They were at a DKI conference, and they just talked about creating a sales culture. And they bought this $3.5 million company, and then they had this goal to have $1 million a month. Within a year, they had $1 million a month.
Wow.
They were a sales and marketing company that just happened to perform restoration services.
Very powerful.
And so that was the way they ran their organization. They had this goal of $1 million a month. They had 18 consecutive $1 million months.
Wow. Just for our audience to know, Mark Davis is
Davis,
currently the CEO of Signal Restoration Services and PuroClean, which is a large restoration franchisor and a large commercial restoration company. And then the other gentleman?
Jeff Johnson. So they became Belfour. They weren't purchased by Belfour. They brought the Hallel Group in from Germany, and they're responsible for Belfour US.
Wow.
And so if any of the Belfour historians are there, if I missed any of that, that's my understanding of that relationship. So anyhow, and Jeff Johnson, then his next move after working in the Belfour world for a little while was to start Interstate Restoration.
Wow, which is huge now.
The Interstate became Belfour, which became, as we know it today, First On Site.
Real quick, I do want to mention and outline one thing. Mad respect for you for the fact that you don't just tell a success story out of this. Because there's so many people out there that have had exits, right? And I've actually interviewed somebody the other day. It's like, oh yeah, I exited my business. They exited their business from not a position of strength. They exited their business when things went wrong. But instead of admitting, hey, things were wrong and it wasn't the best exit ever and, such, they go on and tell this, yep, I exited my business. I'm perfect. I knew how to do it kind of thing. So kudos to you for saying, hey man, things went wrong. Things were kind of out of control and such. It wasn't the best year, but Mark and it was Jeff, right? Came in and helped out. Yeah. That's awesome that you recognize that.
At that point, I moved to Colorado, worked with Mark and Jeff. I helped open the Northern Colorado office for them. So awesome. Opened Fort Collins, but I spent a month working in the Denver office and seeing how they operated, learning about the organization, sitting in the sales meetings, being involved in that culture. It was really cool. It was a great opportunity. And then we opened up Fort Collins, and a little bit based on some flooding from 6 months before, but we grew the office from kind of startup to 350,000 in 3 months.
Nice.
And they maintained that, kept driving that level. So
That's
it was
awesome.
Based off education, communication. We did a lot of lunch and learns. We did started these discussions with restoration, or discussions on restoration with adjusters. And the first one we had 2 adjusters. The second one we had 16 adjusters sitting in our front lobby. They're stacked up, sitting on the reception counter, but we told them things of value that they appreciated.
Yeah.
Threw up some sacred cows of why we did things, and we also told them the reason why we did things.
Transparency, clarity, crystal clear. Hey, we got to eat too. Yeah. If we don't eat as restorers, what's going to happen to you guys as insurance carriers? Yeah. You have to understand that part too, which is awesome versus, hey, let's muddy the waters and, pray that we won't get caught.
Exactly.
So how do we get from running the Fort Collins branch to business mentors?
So during the same time, my father, he embarked on I called it his restoration road trip. He went from Eugene and drove all the way to Michigan.
Wow.
And he stopped by restoration offices along the way of people we knew from disaster cleanup, just people we knew from the industry. And he had this belief before he left that restorers needed someone to talk to who had been in their shoes. And so when he got back from that road trip, I think he had 3 clients. He had one here in Chicago, one in Michigan, and a couple in Michigan maybe. And so he started Business Mentors in September or October of 1997.
Wow.
And he would he'd give these entrepreneurs, he'd give them a business plan. Here's what you need to do. Here's where you go in your business. And they'd buy into it and they love it. And then eventually they'd ask him, okay, now how do I do it? And keep in mind, he wasn't a restorer. He bought a restoration company and he was a businessman that ran a restoration company. And so his response was, I hired people. And so he would call me 2-3 nights a week, say, Phil, I've got this client, they got this issue, and what do you think? And do you want to go move to Michigan and go work for them? Like, I don't want to live in Michigan. Sorry for all you folks in Michigan, but it's kind of cold there, cold in the winter. So nonetheless, I decided kind of my time in Colorado had run its course. I had met a girl, wanted to go back home into Oregon and explore where that went, who is now my wife of 24 years.
Oh, wow.
So I wanted to go back home. And so I was trying to figure out what my next plan was. And I thought about going back, getting my MBA. Bought a book to study for, is it the GMAT that you get or the GRE? Not GRE, no, it's whatever it is, the master, the admission program. And I couldn't study the book. And I figured that was a really bad sign for going back to school. So my father, somewhere in there, said, why don't you hop on board with me? We'll do this together.
Awesome.
I became a 27-year-old consultant.
Wow.
It was a lot of operational stuff. Like I'd teach people how to start a water damage company. Like, you're doing construction, let's go learn drying. Let's go dry buildings out. One of my clients, we actually did a packet. He was moving. It's really doing a restoration packet is a lot of work. 100%. Inventorying things and what a pain in the butt. It would have been easier to throw things in a box, but we packed his house out so this company could learn how to do a restoration pack out. Wow. So that was the kind of stuff we did early on. Now it's a lot more strategic, a lot more of here's your plan, here's how we're going to get there. But early on, I was a restorer. And so my father would, here's your plan. And I'm the guy who comes in, picks up the plan and implements it in their company. That's awesome. So that was kind of how we got our start. And there was a couple consultants out there, but really not a lot. There's a lot of consultants now. Back then, we were the only real mentors in this level of the industry. And
so you're literally the OG restoration consultant.
Yeah, my
I don't
dad
know if you like
was,
that title.
Sure, I'm in my mid-50s now, I guess. So it was different. It was fun. It was really interesting. And yet at the same time, you see the same issues today that we did back then. Back then, you didn't have to be as precise on the business parts of it. There was a lot of room for error. You could bill for that. I mean, if you think about any old timers out there, if you've been doing this for a long time, you could bill extra money to make up for your learning process or your mistakes. Now you can't. You have to be good at what you do. You have to make sure you're making money and being strategic and have a plan. But at the same time, it's, we're drying buildings, we're cleaning things, we're solving problems.
Awesome. Do you have any, how many customers have you helped actually in the past 27 years? And by the way, that's how long I've been in life. So you literally have as much as life experience as I have. You have as much experience in restoration, which is super fascinating. Do you have a count of restorers that you've worked with or helped, or no?
I don't know the exact number. I tried to go back a few times and look and say, how many have I done like in-depth mentoring with? Like, I jumped into their company and I've interviewed their employees, and I know I've helped hundreds of companies. Very specifically, I've worked with probably well over 100 companies doing the mentoring. We had I didn't tell you this. I created in 2006, it was when my twins were born, created the first streaming video online restoration training company.
Oh, wow.
We had 48 hours of online video training for restoration companies. I partnered with people like Chuck DeWald, Steve
wow.
Toburin, Barb Jackson, Michael Pinto. I was filming one of the sessions, Kerry Adler in San Francisco. I did some at his office, and Kerry's like, "Oh my goodness, Phil, that's my dream team. You got my dream team." And so we had a so we completed over 38,000 classes. There were 38,000 individual sessions. We broke them into 1-hour segments. And so I've helped hundreds, if not
That's
more.
awesome.
Just it's a small industry. And so you touch a lot of people at a lot of levels.
Yep.
And some of it's personal coaching. Some of it was the video training. Some of it was workshops. There's been a lot of impact and touch. It's pretty cool to be kind of at that level and have touched some really large companies and some very substantial people and been really involved in their development and their time in the industry.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's incredible. I don't know if you heard of Chris Hill's story with Rapport, or the leadership training.
They tell you about it, but they don't tell you about it.
Okay, yeah.
You just see people walking around with some silly little backpack and things like that, but they tell me you got to go.
Yeah, when you were talking about your impact within the industry, I just keep thinking of also Chris Hill. Like so we've started doing Rapport because of him, right? We sent a bunch of people in every class. There's a restorer there, and it's like out of all the industries in the world, there's restorers there, and like all of the restorers that have gone through this Rapport leadership training, which yes, we can't really talk about too much here because it's secret, but yes, it does have a special backpack. Came from this one guy who decided, hey, this is needed within our industry, kind of thing. But it's just fascinating. Like hundreds of restorers, probably thousands of restorers have read, consumed your materials, learned about you, or even copied things that maybe you helped implement, right? Like obviously, Warner Cruz with JC Restoration was one of your clients here in the Chicagoland market. I mean, he's influenced our trajectory, and we've built an amazing company, and he's had his little impact there. And that impact was your impact impacted him. He then passed it on. So that's absolutely incredible, just thinking of the magnitude within the industry.
So one of the things I've enjoyed is when you look at a long-term perspective of where we are, and I get to see this evolution of the industry as well. So not only is I involved in it, but I get in some ways like Pete Consigli is the historian of the industry, but the industry really started to evolve really substantially in the late 80s. That was when the technology came in. That's when people started building substantial businesses. To be at the level where we're pencil and paper and walking through jobs to where we now have cameras writing estimates, to see each one of those it's been a fun evolution. Awesome. And so yes, it's the people at each one of those too that became thought leaders in that, or really took advantage of ideas and opportunities, and be able to grab a little bit of that throughout each one of those evolutions or iterations.
That's awesome. Now, we were talking about earlier, like obviously the industry has grown and it's different. I mean, we'll talk about like the differences. Like people will talk about, oh, there's technology in the industry, but it sounds like there was technology in the 90s. There's certain individuals in the industry that will pride themselves in being the first one to buy a restoration company. And then it's like, here you are claiming that in the early 90s or mid 90s, there was a restoration company transaction. So it seems like there's these patterns and these things that have always been true in the industry that we're just saying they're new. And that kind of leads to the whole topic of this podcast is like, what are these 5 to 10 timeless pieces of advice for restorers, or things that have been lessons that maybe you've learned and maybe they're backed by stories that, from the 80s till today, they still hold true. They're here for restorers, and they probably will be here for the next 20 years.
We'll go through a couple of them. We talked about 5, but I'm going to maybe take some deviations getting around there. So early on, I tried to study and say, what's the characteristic? Like, is there a number one characteristic of a really successful company? And I would look at great leaders. We talked about 2 of them here, Denny Jensen, or we talked about Mark Davis. We talked about Steve Toburin, or Pete Consigli. There's all these great names that have been around there for a long time that were successful. And like, was there something that tied them together? And I was thinking early on, I'm like, okay, it looks like the really good ones, the owner is involved in marketing and business development. And that was driving it. I thought that was it. And
Interesting.
But it wasn't.
No?
So this is the first thing, is it's leadership. It was leadership. Good companies are run by good leaders. And so one of the characteristics of that was, they're out front and they're representing their company, whether it's just talking in a company meeting with employees, or they're at the Rotary meeting, or they're a leader in their community, they're a leader in their company, leader in their family. Leadership was the number one thing that I kept coming back to. Strong leaders created successful companies. And
1000%.
so I was talking to Mark Springer once, and Mark, he'd actually done a presentation at a conference we did, and he had said that stuck with him, that he realized that leadership was kind of this key to developing a successful company. So he took on this campaign within his company to create leaders at all levels in the company, and started out with like book clubs and getting people to start talking in their company about being a leader.
What does being a leader and fostering an environment of leaders mean? Does it mean that we have, managers, just like a lot of layers of managers and bosses, or can individual contributors be leaders? What do you think about that?
I'm going to go back to one of my favorite authors, Robin Sharma. He wrote a book, The Leader Who Had No Title. You ever read it?
No, but I think I know where this is going.
Yeah, there's a library,
A leader,
the little guru who kind of leads the fiction story is working in a library as a librarian, and then this troubled business leader is trying to figure out where are my struggles and challenges. And what the lesson in the book was, you get to be a leader wherever you are. You can be a technician and be a leader. You can be a manager and be a leader. It's through how you express the work you do. It's how you communicate to people. It's the pride you take of what you do. The Navy SEAL book,
Extreme Ownership.
Extreme Ownership. Yes, thank you. It's taking extreme ownership
100%.
of where you are and the results that you're going to achieve, and that somebody else isn't responsible for it. You are
100%.
So leadership, it doesn't have to be at the top, but the top models what happens down below.
100%.
So you can't expect to have leadership at the bottom if you don't have it up at the top.
1000%.
So leadership was one of the very first things that I came across and said, exceptional companies have exceptional leaders.
Yeah, and like devotion to the outcome, commitment. Like when I talk about the restoration growth model, I was explaining it to you earlier, but it's like you need to have commitment to your team, to your customer, to your community, and to yourself, or lead your team, your customer, your community, or yourself. It kind of is, interchangeable, and like put them before you put your personal interests. Whereas most managers put their personal interest or their title before leading everything else.
So my father and I were business partners for 22 years, maybe 23. I don't know, 22, 23, and then we retired. I don't think we ever had a disagreement.
Wow.
Because my interest was his interest. We always cared about what the other person was getting or doing. And
because
when
if the other person was losing, you were losing.
Yeah. When we put them first, it meant that there wasn't that disagreement, because you understood that your business partner cared about you and how anything was impacting you.
Yes.
And so gets in, leadership. Leadership is number one. Can't have a successful company without it.
Okay.
We can get into like 5 elements of leadership, but that's a whole nother podcast.
That's for the separate podcast and the leadership books. Read some Jim Rohn and you'll be good.
Yes, exactly.
Or some John Maxwell. But
so
tell me more.
Strategic planning, being strategic with what you do.
What do you mean by that?
So we're all busy. It's like my brother had some quote somewhere like, we're busy, but so are the ants. You're always moving, doing something. The question is, what are you doing with your time? Where are you going? Did you sit down and start thinking about it deliberately? Because no matter what happens, if you're strategic or not, you've got 8 hours in your day, or as they say, entrepreneurs work half days. You pick which 12.
Yep.
So when you've defined what it is you're going to do and where you're going, now you can start being accountable to the time you're spending.
Yep.
So how do I spend? I don't think I was particularly good at this in restoration. If I were to sum up my job description, it was to answer my phone calls and clean off my desk. It would have been to get my outbox. It would be in today's world to finish and respond to my emails. But so I was driven by somebody else's priorities rather than my own. And that we all do that. We fall into that classic case. And
it's a hamster wheel.
Did you ever hear of Larry Janeski?
Yes.
Okay, Larry Janeski, Clean Space.
Yep.
He's an entrepreneur. He spoke at one of the restoration conferences years ago. And one of the things he said, which he's not the person to coin this. A lot of people have said it, but he said you need to start valuing your time. And he says, how much time do you spend doing $20 an hour activities?
Oh, yeah. My mentor wrote the book, Buy Back Your Time, Dan Martell. That's the same thing. If you claim you're worth, $200,000 a year and you're doing tasks that are worth $20,000 a year, you're costing yourself the difference, basically.
So go hire somebody for $20,000 a year.
100%.
And so you have to deliberately look at how am I going to spend my time? What is my highest and best? Where am I going to get the best returns? And it's not just me, it's my company.
Exactly.
What did I deliberately want to do? Where am I going this year and next year and 5 years? And if I know where I'm going, I can chart a path to getting there. But if I don't stop and think about that, then my day is driven by somebody else's crisis. My priorities aren't my priorities.
But you see, I think most restorers fall into that trap because of two things. One, it's a very reactive industry, so we're kind of trained that way. But two, it's way easier to deal with the customer or check off that one thing off of your desk than it is to truly get deep down inside and figure out what your next big move is.
Yes.
So we oftentimes want to pick the easy things. We don't want to pick the strategic things because that's hard. Personal growth is hard. Becoming the owner of the 10, 20, $30 million a year company, that's what's hard.
Yeah.
Answering the email, easy peasy.
Yeah. Becoming that $30 million owner is hard, but once you're there, it's not. One of the things I found that was remarkable is that it's much harder to have a $5 million company than it is a $30 million company. Other than the capital and the risk, you've hired good people around you to get there. Your job becomes easier.
Yep.
So you'd said it, that restorers figure we're crisis managers.
Yep.
Why, I can't plan for tomorrow because I don't know what's going to happen tonight. You ever hear something like, I can't do my schedule until first thing in the morning because a job might come in?
Yeah.
Like, man, that's goofy.
It is.
You still have to do tomorrow's jobs.
Yeah.
You know what they're going to be.
The problem, I think you have two choices, right? You can live the life that you design or you can live whatever happens by default.
Yeah.
And if you just go through the motions and you're reactive, well, guess what? Default's going to happen. And you can't control it. Default might be good, it might be bad, right?
Yeah.
But if you could actually design it, and yes, I believe like even in a restoration company, you could design it. We've designed it. I mean, we've ran pro formas within 0.5% variation of like, we said we were going to do this and we did this. And I'm sure you've had clients that have designed, like, I don't think, your success stories happened by default or by accident. I believe they were probably designed, right?
They were. And I think that's the nice thing about an outside advisor. I don't care who it is. There's lots of good outside advisors. It's somebody to hold you accountable to doing what you know you needed to do. And that's hard. It's hard. It's hard to you have to be humble.
Yeah.
To have
Not know what you know. Yeah.
So being strategic in what you're doing and where you're going, and that gets down to, if I know where I'm going a year from now, then my activities today should be driving me towards that.
Yep.
And then I have a team all thinking the same thing. And so we're on the same page, and we're all kind of, there was a audio series that my dad gave me in high school. It was Dennis Waitley's The Psychology of Winning.
Okay.
Ever hear of it?
No.
It's there was 8 attitudinal qualities of a exceptional leader. And so in there was just one story that I don't know why it stuck with me, but because I certainly wasn't thinking about marriage at the time, but it was about marriage. And he said, so many marriages end up in failure because the couples feel that a successful marriage is about looking at each other together. Yet a successful marriage is defined by couples that look in the same direction together. So same thing for a company. A successful company is not a bunch of leaders sitting around the room looking at each other and saying, what are you doing? It's, here's where we're going. How are we getting there? And looking there together. So being strategic, lesson number 2, extremely important. And it's the big successful companies didn't get there by accident.
Yep. I totally agree.
They didn't get by accident. It was by plan.
This is awesome.
Yeah.
Then there's so many parallels. Yeah. We never really talked much. We lived on two opposite sides of the world, handled restoration completely differently, but we're in agreement, like huge agreement. This is cool.
Oh, you ready? Because there's another one. I read your book.
Oh,
I didn't steal your ideas,
okay.
but that's why I liked your book so much. Cash management.
Why is that important?
There's quite a few people that understand the value of capital in their organization. The value of capital is a limiting factor to their success or to their future growth. And so you can spend all the time you want on being profitable, on growing your company, on really trying to drive some level of success. But if you don't collect your bills, I had a client. This is the nature of, so there's things about Canada that's much different than the United States.
Oh, of course.
The Canadian market is extremely difficult from an accountant, particularly when you get to the West Coast, and particularly when you get to Vancouver, because of the three large companies that created the culture of that city and how things worked. So working with a company in Vancouver, we grew from $1.5 million. We grew to 48 million from 2000 to 2015. There was one point where they had 3 years of profits sitting in accounts receivable.
Wow.
3 years of profits. They couldn't touch the money. And so that was, they had, because of that, they had to have discipline around collecting the money and budgeting and spending. And their CFO, good friend of mine, helped bring him on board, Santosh Mohanan. I don't know if you know Santosh.
Nope.
Santosh, we used to call him Dr. No.
Okay. You just say no to everything.
Santosh would be sitting in his office with his head down, looking at spreadsheets, and somebody'd say, "Hey, Santosh, got a question." He'd look up and say, "No, what's the question?" But that was the discipline of managing cash. But so another one, I worked with Russ Palmer and Rachel Stewart. Rachel now has Accelerate, and Russ still runs Titan. And we started looking at how do we quantify accounts receivable? How do we quantify collections? How do we incent and reward that? And we got into this metric of really the real metric for this. And this is a relevant point. I'm gonna get back to Russ and Rachel in a minute. It's a relevant point because the industry study just came out, the survey from Know How and published in Cleaning and Restoration. And Mark Springer had put out a LinkedIn comment today about the turn on receivables for larger companies is over 80 or 90 days. And so we looked on days on cash, and we started looking at that and how we incented that in their company at Titan. We can borrow money from the bank. They had a line of credit, but it's expensive and it's risky and it's our money. So the metric was days on sales. And so they first measured it, and she says, "How should we incent?" I said, "Well, where are we?" And she says, "Okay, we're about 44 days. I said, "Well, why don't we do a small finder's fee or a small reward of $250 when it's under 42 days?"
Wow. And
within about 4 months, there was some months they were at 28 days.
Wow.
And it was because it was the target. It wasn't the incentive. It was, now we have somewhere, we know where we're going, we know what it looks like, and there's a number on a board, and people were incented to do that. People cared about it. And so they're the opposite. So you got years of accounts receivable or profit sitting in accounts receivable, or you got a company that is, and everybody would say, "Well, they're not full service. They don't deal with TPAs." I'm like, yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. It was just like you. You. In your book, you just talked about telling people our expectations. We get paid in 30 days. Why can't you tell people that? There was, I walked through a job. This is I want to hear your point there in a minute, but walked through a job. It was the roof blew off of a 2-story building, retail downstairs. We did all the downstairs drying. Upstairs, the property owner had his contractor, and he says, it was apartments up there, and he says, "I want my guys to do it." The adjuster calls me up and says, "I don't know this construction company. Would you do me a favor and walk through with me?" I walked through with him, and the contractor was good. But the thing that he said at the end, and I about fell over because I never asked the question. He said, "This is great, and we will need to be paid we'll need a draw every 30 days for the work we're done." And the adjuster said, "Sure, okay. Just make sure you submit your invoices and you submit the paperwork."
And how many people didn't even ask that?
Me?
Yeah.
I never asked that question.
So money within restoration, and what I learned when I moved over to the software side, and I think money in general is a fundamentally philosophical problem. And I think it goes back to the concept of abundance mindset versus scarcity mindset. I think business owners in general are very touchy-feely about money, and like in general in society, like asking people how much they make, asking for a deposit, like it's like this shameful thing. And also when we talk about money, there's these scarce connotations of it, right? You talk about people saving money, putting money underneath the mattress. We try to slash expenses to be more efficient and so on and so forth. But I don't know. I've been on this journey with Albi and, now in private equity and restoration and, with our restoration company. I think the fundamental mindset shift that has to happen in restoration is just the way you think about capital and money to shift in an abundance mindset. You don't move money. You don't push money. You attract it.
Yeah.
Money doesn't like stop. Like there isn't a shortage of it. It's like a flow. You just need to get in and tap into the flow. Like I told you about, the banking exercise where it's like, these banks, like literally it's just trust and like there's this unlimited flow between the Fed and the banks and such. Yeah. When you think about the fact that like, with COVID relief, what did we do? We just printed more money. And yeah, I think if restorers just fundamentally can drill down into their heads that like they deserve it, they need it, they will be able to attract it, I think like all these problems will go away. But there's a scarcity thing of, first of all, it's like most restorers come from nothing. So when they see the numbers, they're like, oh man, do I really want to charge this $200,000 deposit? When they probably grew up and that was as much as, a family made in 5 years kind of thing. And there's this like philosophical, touchy-feely, I don't know if you agree or disagree with it, but that's my theory on just the broader spectrum of money management.
So 2 points in here. You ever hired a plumber to go work at your house? Not one of your company plumbers, a plumber to work at your house.
Credit card before you do the work.
Or before they drive out the driveway. Yeah. They get their money. I don't know if you ever met Dan Bolzacelli. Dan's a character. He had a restoration company that was bought out by ATI, but he was down in Fort Lauderdale area. Okay. And Dan did a presentation at one of our conferences once, and he went through that whole process. And he says, "What world do we live in where we're embarrassed about the money he makes?" Yeah. And his presentation was about colors. And he says, "My favorite color, blue." And he shows a picture of his blue Ferrari. And he just talked about why are we embarrassed about being successful when if your doctor drove around in an old pickup truck, that's not esteemed. And so why do we penalize that? I think it comes into the character of the people we are. And it goes back to that conversation of being...
Character's huge.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Because we think, we probably all had moments in our lives, and I used to think this too. I used to have the self-limiting belief that people driving Lamborghinis were assholes. Because probably there was one person in the pink Lamborghini that treated me like shit, and now all of a sudden it's a rare thing. So like we put those things in our head. But I've heard people flip it around and be like, okay, you think, and like, don't hold yourself back from money because you don't want to be the asshole. Go get the money from the assholes. Go become the person with the money that can then do incredible things. And you know what? Become a restoration multimillionaire and give it all away to the cause that you want. But don't hold yourself back just because, I don't want to be viewed like the guy with the blue Maserati or whatever.
Yeah,
it's like a self-limiting thing, no?
No, it is, but at the same time, I'm not saying be flashy and flamboyant with what you do. No, that's going to go back into the kind of person you are. Exactly. It's going to go back into your character. If I'm in a spot where I'm successful, I'm going to want to bring a lot of people along with me because 100%. I know their efforts are what's going to get me there.
Yeah. And different people like different things. You might like, I don't know, vacations, or you might like donating to charity or whatnot. Well, as other people like sports cars. Like not everybody should have a sports car, right? So, but
you shouldn't be penalized for it. You just
1,000%.
Do things the right way, because when you don't, that's where maybe that perception of there are a number of people that were flashy and did things where they made short-term money.
And then they went to the casinos and
And they're in the industry. They're around.
It's the following principle. You can't ever take more than the small percentage of the value that you create. So there's people in the world that like it's flip side. Like imagine if, I don't know, I restored your house for more than it would cost to bulldoze it and build it back up, right? Well, then my restoration services or my drying services didn't really make sense, right? Because it's under this principle that like your value is a small percentage of the overall value that you create in the world. So as long as you can create a giant amount of value in the world and you take a small percentage of it, it makes sense. But when you flip side it, that's when like the scamminess kind of comes into play, where it's like, hey, I'll charge you $100,000 for $10,000 worth of value. Yeah. Right? But if I'm going to charge you $100,000 for $1 million of value, or if I'm going to charge you $10 million for $100 million of value, now it's different. And I think like if we could just focus on being world-class and just solving the biggest problems and creating the best value, we then will deserve a percentage of that. Because if I can solve a $100 million problem, nobody will think twice to cut me $1 million check, right?
The consultants will get in the middle of that.
Yeah. Well, that's a separate story for another time. Exactly. The lawyers too, and the accountants, and then Uncle Sam. But anyway, but this leads to something you're alluding to: character.
As an entrepreneur, as a business owner, as you need to get people to get behind you and want you to be successful, and they want to support that and see you get good things and be rewarded.
Awesome. Any last timeless lessons that have withstood the time? I know we've gone a little long here, but
last timeless lessons. Let's think about providing value, quality. It kind of goes through some of the things we've talked about before. Being strategic, having cash, being strategic on the jobs you do. And I think, one of the places we always look and say, okay, we got to save money, we got to cut money, and they look at overhead and say, I got to cut some bit of what I am spending to run the company, when in fact they've got the opportunity sitting in front of them, and it's the revenue from the job, and they let all of these costs just slip through their fingers. And so it's being deliberate about how to spend the money on the jobs you do and the work you do. If it's easier to find 3% margin on a job than it is to cut 3% out of your overhead.
100%.
One of the things that I learned early on was that 5% change in your gross margin for most companies will double their net profit dollars.
Wow.
Isn't that remarkable?
Yeah.
But I think it gets into the fact that the reality, the industry survey would just say that the average company is making 7% net. That's not much net for the work we do, the value we provide, the risk that we have.
Is that accrual or cash basis?
I don't know.
Because if it's accrual, then you're like squeezing even more. What do you think, by the way? Do you back that up? Because I heard like some sort of DKI study where it's like, oh yeah, DKI is the cream of the crop, and it's like 5% net. Like, to me, that's a bad business.
It's a bad business.
Like
5% is, if you're at 5%, you're close to on life support.
Yeah. What do you think's a healthy net profit for restoration contractors to target?
Wasn't it 10%? No, the 10 and 10.
Yeah, the Xactimate training percentages that were just thrown in there.
Yeah, and honestly, a well-run company should be at 12+%. I've seen a lot that are at 25 and 30. Those are anomalies. That's
mitigation heavy.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen a couple construction companies that are pushing that because they run a smart business. But that's hard. Those are the outliers. If you're a franchise, you're paying your royalties.
Oh yeah, that's tough.
So 12 to 15 points is a good number. Know a lot of people that make more of it. I know that quite a few people that make less. But that's a place that I look and say, okay, this is a reasonable return on my investment. Anything below that is risky. When I say you're on life support at 5%, it's actually probably 3% is life support, because the numbers you're looking at are not a cash number, and you've got all your debt payment, you've got your taxes, you've got maybe your subchapter S, and you got to pay your distributions to pay your taxes. So that's all cash out the door, which is probably 3 to 5%.
Exactly.
So you're left trying to piece this together. So if you're making 5% and you're wondering why you're never catching up on cash,
it's because of that.
It's because you're only making 5%. And everything else is on your balance sheet, not on your P&L. And if you don't understand the difference between those two, you better sit down with your CPA, because that's a requirement to grow your business. So fiscal discipline, I would say, would be one of those characteristics of a successful company. It goes in the strategic plan. It goes so being deliberate about how you spend your money on the jobs, or just on your overhead, for how you pay people, the expectations, the benchmarks you have for the great people in your company. Those types of things, that's the discipline that creates success, and the success that should be recognized and rewarded in our companies as well.
Wow. Awesome. Man, this was super fun. Thanks so much for joining us here in beautiful Chicago. We always end off these podcasts with a hug. So
absolutely.
Mind? We can do a quick hug
get the table out of the way.
Yeah. Let's do this. Thanks so much, man.
Yeah, appreciate you.